Move up to the front. Ray isn't going to bite. I have one housekeeping detail before we start. You will receive an email response to any question you have submitted on the information request forms in your registration packets. These questions will also be posted to the Section Chapter Volunteer Forum. That's the virtual community we've created for your use. This community is an online collaborative environment where you can hold threaded discussions and share files. Only Section Chapter volunteers are able to join. If you're not familiar with it, make sure to stop by the Corporate Strategy and Communications booth in the exhibits area to get more detailed information and to get your account set up. So all your questions are going to be answered. We promise that. We're going to deliver. Okay, let's get to it. Our 2002 IEEE President, Findlay, probably doesn't require an introduction to this audience. I am sure many of you have met him over the years. You've probably even heard this talk, some of you. Ray resides in Region 7, is a member of the Hamilton section. He is a past Vice President of Regional Activities and a past Director of Region 7. By way of introduction, let me relate to you just a couple of short anecdotes. A little funny. I became chair of Sections Congress quite by Ray's design while I was chairing a regional activities board meeting a few years back. Ray reached over and took the gavel from me, told me to get out of the room. It's my meeting. When I was invited back into the room a couple minutes later, I got this little round of applause. Guess what? You are now chair of Sections Congress 2002. As volunteers yourselves, I'm sure you understand how this process works. But the story doesn't quite end there. Later that same year, I was one of many persuading Ray to run for president-elect again, and it was my privilege and honor to place Ray's name in nomination for that high office that he now holds this year. Perhaps Ray can tell us who got the better of that volunteer exchange, given his duties versus mine over the intervening years. With that, please let me introduce to you our 2002 IEEE President, Dr. Raymond Findlay, who will deliver our Sunday plenary session on leadership.
Now I only have one problem. I don't know how to get my screen back up. First of all, I offer you an apology. I did not choose the hour. I should say, and this remark will become clearer later on, that whenever I get an email or a phone call that's a phone call of complaint, shall we say, or an email of complaint, because those are the ones that I mostly get, my first response is to apologize. Because the president, the leader, is always responsible. And with that thought, let me go on. I came across this comment, "Think Like a Mountain," when I was looking at a little booklet by a well-known Canadian artist, Robert Bateman, who quoted it. And with a little research, I discovered that it was Aldo Leopold who said it. He was a conservationist. And when he said it, by that he meant, think in terms of permanence. Think of the interactions among the many elements of your environment. For example, one particular one that Bateman was remarking on is what happens when you shoot all the wolves. Well, the deer get a little out of hand, and when the deer get a little out of hand, they browse, clear up the trees, killing the trees, killing most of the foliage, and so the problem goes on. But if you think in terms of permanence, then you think of the consequences of killing all the wolves. And with that, I thought, we have to think in terms of a legacy for our children. The sentiment is equally applicable to our organizations, our companies, even other charitable organizations that we may be a part of. So as leaders, and here let me be specific, as leaders of IEEE, we need to think in the long term when we're making our decisions, instead of thinking in the short term as a protectionist philosophy. So I would charge you to ask what will be enduring when we've finished our terms and moved on. What will we be remembered by? What will our legacy be for our children? That's as by way of introduction to leadership. We need to develop, use, and continuously refine our leadership skills, not just for the sake of IEEE or our companies, but as a way of life. We can actively work in all the spheres of our activity to help IEEE achieve its mission, help our companies to grow and prosper, and to leave for our children a better place, a legacy of value. And I thought, let's put this in terms of the IEEE mission. The IEEE promotes the engineering process of creating, developing, integrating, sharing, and applying knowledge. Now, we're very specific, of course, about electro and information technologies and science. But the key phrase is for the benefit of humanity and the profession. How can IEEE leaders help? It's up to you, our leaders, to translate this message for our members. It's up to you, our leaders, to give the IEEE mission meaning at all levels, particularly at the personal level. And it's up to you to show how IEEE benefits its members and especially its volunteers. Leadership, according to Peter Delisle, I discovered Peter Delisle at a PACE workshop many years ago. He is now an adjunct visiting professor at Austin College in Texas. But I was struck by the phrase that he used. Leadership is the ability to influence with or without authority. And he said there are three cornerstones: commitment, ability, awareness. These all contribute to effectiveness. And what does this mean? Well, the first problem, as I see it, is awareness. It's understanding who we are, what our best strengths and weaknesses are, what our personal attributes are, and understanding that there are differences between each of us and everybody else. So everybody has a different perspective. And with that awareness, using it, having the ability to effectively promote what needs to be promoted as your leadership design. That takes commitment. This is another quotation from Warren Bennis, a delightful little book on becoming a leader. Leaders know what they want, why they want it, and how to communicate what they want to others in order to gain their cooperation and support. The key to full self-expression is understanding oneself and the world. And the key to understanding is learning from one's own life and experience. What do leaders do? Set direction, give guidance, motivate group members to accomplish group goals. And notice this is group goals. Communicate the group vision and goals both internally and externally. But, most importantly, leaders listen. Leaders interpret the organization mission as achievable goals, which is why I flashed the IEEE mission a few moments ago. Leaders delegate responsibility for achieving goals. They delegate authority for achieving group objectives to the members of the group responsible for the outcomes, and they demand accountability for achieving those goals. A leader depends upon the group's lieutenants, is democratic for the most part, but authoritarian when required. A leader carries out the will of the group. This sometimes is the most difficult, to carry out the will of the group. It's sort of the expression to check every once in a while to make sure that your followers are actually following. A leader demands loyalty from every member for carrying out the will of the group. And I think it's incumbent on us all, when we set up our sections, for example, to ensure that each of your loyal members understands that this is the mission. Once the group has decided, then it's incumbent upon every member to carry out the will of the group. Leaders are champions of the cause, and leaders guide the group during times of storm. And I would say that you'll never know whether or not you've got a leader until you have a storm. An IEEE leader chairs meetings of the group, is fair and impartial with every member of the group, gives every member an opportunity to be heard, conveys respect for each member's opinion, and notice this, listens. Leaders know who they are. They know their own strengths and weaknesses. This is particularly important, to find out what your strengths and weaknesses are, and I'll have more to say about this later. They recognize and praise good work, and they give credit to others. Credit is one of those funny things I've discovered. The more that you give away, the more you get back. It really is very important for your followers to give them credit for their accomplishments, what they do. Every piece of what they do is important. Make everyone feel important. And leaders, of course, we hope command respect. Leaders take the blame, and now you know about my opening comment, that as president, if you ask, yes, of course, the president's to blame. I might not know what it is, but I better find out and fix it. A leader inspires loyalty, supports the ideas of others. A leader expects the best. Expectations are wonderful. If you expect the best from your children, for example, strangely enough, more often than not, it comes through. I asked my son once, I said, why'd you go on to university? We never told you to go on. He said, yeah, he said, but you expected us to go. We knew. And a leader gets down and dirty. He makes coffee. He's a member of the troops. The foundation for an effective group is trust. And too often, I've noted, at practically every level, trust is lacking. But without trust, there can be no delegation of responsibility. Without trust, there's a reluctance to assign authority. Without trust, there's no accountability. Assume trustworthiness until you have evidence to the contrary, and things will go much smoother. A few years ago, when I was looking for some help in constructing a talk on leadership, I thought, well, I'll go to that source, the dictionary, and find out what it has to say about a leader. A leader is a person who is followed by others. Hey, that's good. It's also the horse placed at the front in a team or pair. Okay, I'm the front horse. And then I thought, let's look up manager and see whether that's different or not. A manager is a person controlling or administering a business or a part of a business. All right, that computes. A person regarded in terms of skill in household or financial or other management. Aha! My wife is a manager. She must be. She manages me pretty effectively. I thought it might be useful to look at a leader, Samuel Hayakawa. And in case you've never heard of Hayakawa, he's sort of an icon, and he's definitely a hero of mine. He was a professor at San Francisco State College. About 500 students went on strike, so to speak, but that usually means a rampage, to force demands for changes in the college's policies. This caused the resignation of a couple of presidents. He made headline news a few days after he was appointed as acting president. The rioting students refused to turn off blaring loudspeakers on a van so that he could be heard. Hayakawa, who at the time was 62, strode through the protesters, and this, by the way, was all on TV, nimbly scrambled to the roof of the vehicle, yanked the wires from the speakers, and then gave his message. Education is for all, not just the rioters. It isn't any surprise that he subsequently became a U.S. Senator. I thought it might be useful also to review what a manager does. And you can find this prescription in any book on management. Now, strangely enough, most books on management are called leadership. However, if you are leading with authority, it's very different than leading without authority. Some managers are leaders, and they manage change in an orderly fashion. They review the responsibilities and performance goals with each of the team players. They state clearly the basis for evaluation, where each person fits in the organization. They set directions. They set expected achievement for each individual within the next work period. All of this you probably know. They show the team members where they fit in achieving unit goals. They develop realistic milestones and deadlines. They agree on information needed to track performance. They meet their employees regularly to review progress and direct activities. They review the progress of the unit and how it fits within the hierarchy of the company. Especially, managers need to learn. For example, where goals are not achieved, they have to develop strategies to overcome problems. They have to ask each team member to evaluate their own performance, as well as that of their immediate manager. This is what effective managers do. They establish performance criteria for their own bosses, both for themselves and the unit, and they provide leadership. What is leadership? How do you get it? I do believe that leaders are rarely born. Leaders make themselves. They determine their own strengths and weaknesses. They become self-aware. That's one of the cornerstones that Delisle outlined. There are a number of tools that you can use to find out something about yourself. For example, personal interactive skills. I use Jungian personality types. Many of you know the instrument which is used as Myers-Briggs personality type indicator. This grew out of Jungian personality types. Other tools that you can use are verbal communication skills. For example, attending skills. You know what attending is? Attending comes from attendre, the French, to wait. Cognitive listening, which is what we expect everybody to do, especially those of us who happen to be teachers or professors. We expect our students to be always in that mode where they're thinking about what we're saying. Of course, they're not. Creative listening is brainstorming. You should look for ways to develop other tools for selling, persuading, negotiating, resolving conflicts. Let me just take a few moments out to comment on conflict, because some people believe that conflict is bad. And in some instances, it can be divisive, so you need to find ways to cope with conflict. However, if in your section meetings, for example, there is a possibility that critical questions might be asked, my suggestion to you is to encourage them. You won't know whether you've found a correct decision unless you test it. So some amount of conflict is good. Too much is bad. And of course that means that you have to find ways to overcome resistance to the will of the group. First requisite for excellence in leadership is to know yourself. Find out who you are. And as I said, I use Jungian personality type preferences. You can use, if you want to find out your conflict preference, you can use the Thomas Kilmann conflict preference indicator. If you want to find out how well or how much you're willing to trust others, you can use the Johari window. There are negotiation style instruments, and there are other instruments that will help you to discover your own attitudes, and I urge you to find out what they are and use them. Let me give you a brief overview of Jungian personality type indicators. Those of you, by the way, how many of you know what they are? Several of you. That's great. About maybe a quarter. They're useful because once you realize the diversity of personalities and where you fit, then you can understand some of the attributes that other people have. For example, about 75% of the population are extroverts. Now, about 75% of engineers are introverts. Shouldn't surprise you. Now, what's the difference? Well, if you happen to be walking down the street with a friend, and the friend is talking about a problem that he has, perhaps at work or something, and he might be talking out loud about it, and as he walks along, he's actually, you realize, solving the problem out loud. You know you got an extrovert on your hands. If you've got a child who comes home one day and says something like, let's say it's a boy. Boys are the most difficult. He says, Dad, I got a real problem. There's this other guy, and you know, I really want to beat the stuffing out of him. Can you teach me how to do that? And if you're wise, you'll say, well, tell me more. And he'll say, Well, he took me when I was driving my bike along, and he didn't even apologize or anything. He didn't come back, didn't find out whether I was all right. Just left me lying there on the ground, and I scraped my knee, and gee, I really feel bad, and everybody saw it, and this is tough. You got an extrovert on your hands, because if you leave him to his own devices, he'll solve the problem himself. He'll realize it was an accident. And he might even seek out the other fellow and make friends of him. An introvert, of course, wants to solve the problems internally. So if you happen to be a boss and you happen to be an extrovert, what you would really like to do is go into your colleague's office, and you'd like to chat with them and tell them things. And if you're really a strong extrovert, after you've been sitting in your office or your cubbyhole for a while, you really got to get out and talk to people. I'm an extrovert, I know. Whereas if you're an introvert, you really don't want to be bothered. You want to get on with your job. You'd rather see it on a piece of paper. If the boss has something to tell you, he can send you an email, and you'll get to it when you're ready. I have an introvert friend. I've told this story. A few of you have heard it before. He's a professor. You walk into his office. It's dark, by the way, when you walk into his office, because he has a light on his desk so it won't show through the window. And the first thing that greets you is the back end of his computer. Beside his computer, there are 3 stacks of books and a couple of journals. Beside his desk, there's a filing cabinet. And as you walk into his office, you wonder how the heck he gets in behind in the morning. He's an introvert. The second pair of attributes is really how you see the world, whether you're creative, ingenious, future-oriented, fantasize, imaginative, you like concepts and ideas, or whether you're the sensing type, practical, experience-oriented. You depend upon your 5 senses. The intuitive type depends upon his 6th sense. About 75% of the world are sensing type. Guess where electrical and computer engineers fit. You got it. They fit in with the intuitives. This isn't a bad thing, by the way. There's nothing wrong with where you might fit. On what basis do you prefer to make decisions? This is preference. Thinking types, impersonal, objective judgments, logical orientation. This is the only one for which there is a gender difference. About 60% of males are thinking types. About 60% of females are feeling types. So this doesn't mean to say that you don't feel things with the same emotional intensity. It's how you prefer to make decisions, on what do you depend. And I use this when I'm talking to some of my project groups, when I'm teaching project management, to tell them why I'm making sure that in every group there's at least one female. You can't make effective decisions unless you make sure that you have the broad scope in the group. So I try to ensure that each group is as diverse as I can get it. Mind you, the first little while is pretty exciting while I storm through it. The last pair are judging and perceptive. I sort of like this pair because I'm a judger. About 50% of the population are judgers and 50% perceptives. And from my observation, in my classes at least, the same thing holds true. Approximately 50% of my students are judging and 50% perceptive. But if you have a very strong judger, a really strong judger wants to get on with things, especially if they're intuitives, they sort of cover the surface. They might get their reports done in a hurry and get it in. They skip a lot of the details. Whereas, let's say, a sensing perceptive type is really into the details. And if you happen to have a boss who's a sensing perceptive type and you happen to be an intuitive judging type, just imagine the clash when you trundle into the boss's office and you say, you know, I finished this project, here's the report, I want to get on with the next thing. You know, I understand that the project from ABC company is coming along. I can hardly wait to get my teeth into it. And your boss says, oh yeah, but hold on a minute, we really don't have to do that. We don't have to finish this. You've got another week on this. Now, have you considered X, Y, Z details? It's the foundation for argument. There are 16 ways to combine these things, and of course there are various degrees within each of the categories. So we have 16 possible attributes. Let me just run through a few of them. If you look at the general population, this comes from Myers-Briggs' study. If you look at the general population, you can see up in the right-hand corner, the INTJs. Now get a strong handle on the INTJs there. A lot of you are INTJs, trust me on this. They're 1% of the general population. Down in the lower left-hand corner, notice the administrators, about 13%. Now, did you wonder why your engineering department has problems with your marketing department? Here's why. When you look at the INTJs and the INTPs, they constitute about 25% of the population of electrical and computer engineers. There aren't too many of them who fit down in the lower left, but when you look at the commerce students, and they go on, of course, to make a lot of money, look at where they fit in the lower left-hand corner. Something like 22% are ESTJs. There aren't a lot of them up there in the upper right-hand corner. This is just by way of becoming aware of the differences. Conflict style preferences, there are 5 of them in the Thomas Kelvin inventory. Accommodating, that's cooperative, but not assertive. And this is generally a lose-win strategy. Avoiding, that's where you don't cooperate and you don't assert yourself either. Actually, what you do is leave the room. That's a lose-lose strategy. Everybody loses. Competing is where you really want to win regardless of the consequences. You're not cooperative. One would say that it isn't just assertive, it's aggressive. That's a win-lose strategy. I win, you lose. Collaborating is both. That's cooperative, assertive, and it's a win-win strategy. Everybody talks about compromise as the middle of the road. You have to learn to compromise. Well, what you really have to do is learn how to collaborate, because compromise doesn't get you there. That's a lose-lose strategy. There are times when an effective leader will make use of each of these, depending upon the circumstance. For example, one of the reasons that you might decide to use an accommodating strategy is because by doing so, you retain a relationship. I don't know whether I should tell this next story because my wife is actually sitting in the audience. But my wife knows that once in a while she'll start off with some statement or something like that with which I might violently disagree. And I realize after a few minutes of discussion that this is very important to her. And it's important to her to be right. And then you ask yourself the question, is it important for me to be right? What's more important? Is it more important for me to be right, or is my relationship more important? And at that stage, I will say to her, and she knows this, I'll say to her, "You're right, honey." And she says, "Oh, you." By that, she conveys that she knows. You might adopt an avoiding strategy, for example, in a meeting when you realize that there is no way that you do not have the facts to put your case appropriately. And the correct thing to do is to defer, at least for a while, until you have the opportunity to collect what you need to make the case. Avoid. There is a danger in both accommodating too often and avoiding too often. And the danger is you may be seen as a weak person. I feel fairly comfortable that my wife doesn't see me as a weak person. However, if you do it too often, then you will lose respect. So you have to make sure that you come back at the appropriate time with your facts in order. Competing. There are times when hard decisions need to be made, and the only strategy that will be effective is a competing strategy. Use it. That's authoritarian. At times, an effective leader must be authoritarian when decisions which may not be popular must be made. Collaborating. This is ideal, but do you have the time? If you can get all parties to agree, then it's the ideal way to achieve effective goals and to accomplish those goals. Collaborating strategy. But it takes a lot of time. And my advice is, if it's a short-term problem that you're trying to solve, then by all means use a compromising strategy. Compromise for the time being, but look for a long-term strategy. I won't go into the Johari window because I don't have time. However, it's a measure of how much we're prepared to trust others. It's also a measure of how much you are prepared to self-disclose. Nonverbal communication skills learn what they are. They're very effective. The way you sit, stand, dress, write, etc. conveys a certain image. You saw the image on Friday night that Dan conveyed. I don't want you to forget this because, you want to go away from this Congress remembering something of value, and that was the image. Part of that image, when he got down to the point where he rolled up his shirt sleeves, is, and when I ask my classes, what is this image that's conveyed, they tell me, you're getting down to work. That's what it is. Just by taking off your jacket, your tie, and rolling up your sleeves. And of course, that's what it is. Do you convey a dynamic attitude, or do you appear tired all the time? If you convey a dynamic attitude, it's strange and marvelous how much everybody else will perk up. They'll become enthusiastic. They'll become excited. Expression. Do you show good cheer? I think that this is particularly important, to show good cheer, not a sour expression. And of course, positive gestures assist, especially when you're running a meeting. And you might say, well, can I change? One of the reasons why I picked on Hayakawa about 30 years ago when I first discovered him, it was more than 30 years ago, as a hero, is because he did some studies by observation. And he looked at people, and let me try to convey in my own way some of the things, the background behind his observations. Each of us carries a certain cargo which defines who we are. Oh, sorry, I went the wrong direction. Occasionally I do that, I'm sorry. in terms of your likes, dislikes, experiences, memories, etc. This defines who you are. Do you know it? That's a question. Do your friends know it? That's a question. Some of it can be so far hidden that we're not conscious it's there. So the way we see ourselves is slightly different from the way we actually are. The way our friends see us is slightly different from the way we are. So a friend might make observations which agree with some of our perceptions of ourselves. However, they also see things that may not be true based upon their own perceptions. Who you think you are is a little bit different too. You may ascribe to yourself certain talents that you don't have. This isn't necessarily a bad thing, by the way, because the perceptions that you ascribe may be towards learning. And this, of course, did I go back again? This, of course, is what Hayakawa told us. That the real person, in terms of capabilities, beliefs, etc., tends to move towards who the person believes they are. So if you believe you're a great leader, you are much more likely to become a great leader. I think what this says is believe in yourself. However, if you don't believe in your ability, if you have too many self-doubts, then you won't get there. What this tells me is that everybody can become a great leader in their own spheres. You can become the person you can be by understanding yourself, by determining your attributes, and of course the advantage of finding out what your attributes are. If you happen to be an introvert and you're aware that, for example, that you're an introvert, that this is what you prefer to do, then you will make sure that you have the opportunity to deal with the extroverts in your organization, to deal with them. That's important if you know who you are. So becoming a leader is based on the assumption that leaders are people who are able to express themselves fully. Again, this comes from Warren Bennett. By this I mean that they know who they are, what their strengths and weaknesses are, and how to fully deploy their strengths and compensate for their weaknesses. The key to full self-expression is understanding oneself and the world, and the key to understanding is learning from one's own life and experience. So if you accept this, then anyone can develop the skills to become an effective leader. And the first step is to find out who you are. Let me tell you what I think are the attributes of a leader. First of all, a leader has guiding vision. Effective leaders know what they want to do. They have the strength of character to pursue their objectives in the face of opposition and in spite of failures. Effective leaders establish achievable goals, but let me tell you that many of the goals that I see that are established are too short. Make sure that the goals that you establish are achievable, but they don't have to be small goals. Effective leaders believe passionately in their goals. They have a positive outlook on who they are, and they love what they do. Their passion for life, if you like, is a guiding star to follow because they radiate promise. Effective leaders, and we know this, you can tell from the media over the past year or so with various companies that, shall we say, have had problems with their image. You can tell that integrity is important to our societies. Integrity is also important in most companies. If you ask CEOs of companies, and there was an actual study done on this, what the 5 most important attributes of their employees are, inevitably, 2 of the top 5 are integrity and honesty. So, Curiosity. Leaders are learners. They wonder about every aspect of their charge. They find out what they need to know in order to pursue their goals. Also, you must be capable and aware that risks are necessary in order to achieve your goals. Take calculated risks when necessary to achieve your objectives. If a mistake is made, an effective leader will make use of that. He'll learn from it. He'll use it as an opportunity to explore other avenues. Effective leaders are dedicated. They're dedicated to their charge, and they'll work assiduously on behalf of their followers. And I use this word followers, but it isn't really that. It's the people who respect them, who have loyalty to them, who believe in their ability to lead. Those are the people that you want to cultivate, to nurture in your organizations. And I do believe one of the things that I found most valuable and most satisfying in the many offices that I've held in IEEE, a long time ago when I was a student activities, a student branch counselor, I determined that what I would really like to do is nurture somebody else to do the job better than I did, and to find out where you could go wrong. Each of the offices I've held, I've tried to find somebody coming along behind me who would do a better job. This has given me a remarkable satisfaction over the years, because I know when I leave the organization, I'm leaving it in good hands. Charisma. Effective leaders are charismatic. You can develop it. Some people say you're born with charisma. Most important of all, leaders listen. If you want to be a leader, listen to your followers. Look over your shoulder occasionally. Check to make sure they're behind you. And when I say behind you, it's sort of within my own household. I have behind me a very effective person. Without that support, I could not possibly achieve what I've achieved. Of all the attributes that we have, I think listening is the most important. It's also the hardest to develop. And you might try listening at a meeting and see how much time you're prepared to talk and how much time you're prepared to listen. But when you listen actively. One thing that I found to be particularly useful when I have brainstorming sessions in groups is to take out a pad and write down what other people are saying, to make sure that I'm listening, I'm hearing what they have to say. I found that very effective. What you think and do in your private life is what you reap in your public or corporate life. Occasionally we forget that. Integrity and honesty are exceptionally important in all spheres of our lives. You are what you think and believe. So if you want to be a leader, take control of your life, assume responsibility for everything that happens to you, convey a positive and dynamic attitude in everything you do. Most importantly, accept blame. Learn from your own mistakes as well as those of others. Think great thoughts. I believe that many of the reasons why some of our companies are going broke at an alarming rate is that they've been thinking too small. They haven't put their assets together when they needed to do so. They've climbed too high too fast, and the ladder's made of rope, and it's not attached at the top. Determine what your real goals are and then strive to achieve them. Think like a mountain. It was suggested to me that this would be a wonderful opportunity for you, if you care to do so, to ask questions of me. And if we can have the house lights up, and I understand that there are some mics around which are available if you want to ask me a question, I'll try to answer either that or with all the many experts in the audience, among other leaders. Thank you very much. Pardon me?
Should leaders criticize the followers?
Should leaders be criticize their followers? Let me take that in two parts. I would say that if you're a leader within an organization, an organizational unit of IEEE, it's probably not good to go to your followers and criticize them, because you'll lose them pretty quickly. If you're a manager, it's incumbent upon you to take someone who is not performing their job, to take them off in private. Make sure that it's in private. Tell them exactly what their job is and what they need to do in order to perform it. And this brings us into that sphere that I said occasionally you have to make very hard decisions. If you're a manager and one of your people is not performing up to scratch, even after they've been given a second and third chance, you have no alternative. You have to move them on to a job that they can do. And that may mean out of your organization.
So you have spoken about various qualities of a leader. It may be honesty, it may be integrity, it may be devotion, it may be dedication, it may be cooperative attitude, positive mental attitude. But in every organization, you find people competing with you. And sometimes you understand that your weakness is your weakness. In that situation, what are you to do?
Along the way to my current position, as some of you know, I ran 3 times for president before I became president. I developed a very great respect for the people who were, as you say, competing against me. I realized that they would make effective leaders. I realized that there were differences, that each of us had our own strengths and weaknesses. However, it's particularly important when you find yourself in one of those positions where you are competing to recognize in the other folks who are also running for office that they have skills which may do just as well. So when they get in, make sure at that time, if you don't make it, that you support them. I think that that's just as important in terms of being an effective leader as actually achieving the job.
In the metropolitan section from Division 6. I would appreciate you giving advice to those leaders here. I often heard that it has not been my experience, but I've heard several saying that they experience lack of getting volunteers. They can't get volunteers to take over the jobs in the section. So I would appreciate your advice. Thank you for those that need that kind of help. Thanks.
Thank you. That's an excellent question, and I'm sure that it's one that you're all going to wrestle with for a while this weekend. I can suggest some strategies that might work. One of the things that I found work very well in the past is singling out some people who have done some excellent things in your organization. Make sure that you have a big deal, make a big deal about it. You might have a dinner or something like that, and make sure that everybody is aware of the fact that those particular volunteers you've singled out are being singled out for reward, for acknowledgement, for their accomplishments within the organization. This can help you to grow. When people see that there is value in what they do, then I have noticed that even in spite of adversity, even on occasions when companies don't recognize how important it is, even within their own organizations, for their people to develop interpersonal skills such as they can get through IEEE. Even under those circumstances, I've found the volunteers themselves, because of the rewards they see, are prepared to dedicate their efforts as necessary towards IEEE. What it comes down to is taking the blame for problems within your outfit and rewarding, giving credit for any successes to the people who do it, and make sure everybody knows it. I had an opportunity. I mentioned earlier that when I was student branch counselor, I looked for ways to reward the people, and I thought that there was value in doing so, because I was sort of hoping that they would take over jobs in the local section. It needed it. And I organized, with their help, a session in which what they thought was going to happen was that we were going to dedicate a student center, which in Canada we call a McNaughton Center. The dean had agreed to give them a room in the basement. Well, I should describe the room. It was an old washroom, actually. And attached to it was a room with a lathe. And the students could have that if they cleaned it all out and did the work, and they did. And they thought that what was happening was that we were going to dedicate this ceremony. And the president of the university came over to view it, and some of the people who were associated with the McNaughton Center program came from outside. There was quite a gathering. I had made up some little brass plaques to hang on a leather thong, and called each of the major people up, there were about 17 of them, by the way, to receive one of these plaques. How wonderful it was later on to recognize those names as they accomplished things, not only within IEEE, but personally. I am told that the metro system finally has come to life and has enabled our student volunteers to get here, and we have some of them within the room. These are the people who have been running around doing things for us with too little recognition. And can I take a page out of my own book here and recognize their magnificent efforts? Thank you so much. And thank you.
Mr. President, thank you, and accept this token of our appreciation for your leadership this year as our president and for sharing your knowledge with us this morning. Thank you. One housekeeping detail, I've been told by our program chair that if you're going to sessions in Salon 3 and 4, they've just been flipped. So if you were going to Salon 4 for a session, go to Salon 3. So they've been flipped for the rest of the day. We just have a bigger room versus a smaller room, okay? And the next breakout sessions will start promptly at 9:15. Thank you.